You are listening to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast Network. For more great filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, head over to ifhpodcastnetwork.com. Today's show is sponsored by Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, how to turn your independent film into a profitable business. It's harder today than ever before for independent filmmakers to make money with their films. From predatory film distributors ripping them off to huckster film aggregators who prey upon them, the odds are stacked against the indie filmmaker. In Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, I break down how to actually make money with your film projects and show you how to turn your indie film into a profitable business. With case studies examining successes and failures, this book shows you the step-by-step method to turn your passion into a profitable career. The book is available in paperback, ebook, and of course, audiobook. If you want to order it, just head over to www.filmbizbook.com. That's filmbizbook.com.
Today we're talking with Emily Best of Seed&Spark. So,
hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast, where it's all about learning how to make and market your independent film online. And now your host, Jason Buff.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast. I am your host, Jason Buff. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking with Seed&Spark founder Emily Best. Now, if you don't know much about Seed&Spark, stay tuned, because if you're a filmmaker, Seed&Spark is an amazing way to not only crowdfund your film, but it's also a distribution platform. And as we talk about, later in the podcast, it's offering lots and lots of benefits for filmmakers. So make sure to check that out. As always, don't forget to go to indiefilmacademy.com and sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send you a free ebook. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. All right, now here's my interview with Emily Best. So how are things going? Tell me, what is like, I'm sure you've done a million interviews, and I get this, perception of you that you're just constantly out there and promoting and learning and doing stuff. What is a typical day for you like these days?
Oh, a typical day for me. God, no. So now you're going to make me reveal how boring my job actually is. No, So a typical week, I think, is easier because I travel about every 2 weeks. And so about every 2 weeks, I'm going to a festival. We're teaching a crowdfunding to build independence workshop. We're out there meeting with filmmakers, learning about their projects, learning the challenges that they have. Recently, we've been doing a lot of distribution deals. When will this podcast air?
Probably in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. So as long as it's after next week, I can tell you all the things, or I will have to hold back some of them.
Okay. Yeah, I can hold it for like 3 weeks. That's
okay,
fine.
Cool. So one of the things that we have done, last week we announced that we're now distributing our films to iTunes. And over the next 2 weeks, we'll announce that we're also distributing to Verizon Fios cable VOD and emerging pictures for theatrical. So that means that filmmakers who crowdfund with us and reach certain audience milestones. So it's not about how much money you raise, but how many followers you gather, right? How many early audience members acknowledge you.
Right.
You can guarantee yourself real wide monetizable distribution into, it's 7 million homes through Verizon Fios. It's 100 million users through Apple iTunes, and Emerging Pictures has a network of 220 theaters in the U.S. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's really exciting because now when we go out on the road and we teach filmmakers about how to build their audiences from the very beginning, and that their strategic thinking is best placed no longer just on the life cycle of a single film, but the life cycle of your relationship to your audience, which I think we lay out very clearly is the life cycle of your entire career. We can now say, and here, if you do this work, are real monetizable deals available to you immediately. As opposed to do all this work and then still wait for some distributor to pick me,
Right.
So that's the piece of it that technology has always promised we could disrupt, but never quite delivered. And now we're really seeing it. And to get a company like Verizon to pay attention to us, tiny little Seed&Spark. But also, I've talked to, these companies have a lot of people working on their deals. I've talked to 15, 18 people inside that company, and they're all so excited to get connected with independent filmmakers. Like, I don't think independent filmmakers, because the business is sort of made for you to feel unimportant all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't think they get a good sense of how excited people, even in these huge multinational companies, are to work with them and to learn about their material and to learn about their journeys.
So how does that work exactly? I mean, somebody who funds get their independent film funded through you guys will then have access to, I mean, how exactly does that work? So they then have access to deals, to be distributed on iTunes, on Verizon Fios, cable VOD, right? So that's people like buying to rent or through EST, like a download to their TV. Okay. And with Emerging Pictures, Emerging will basically bring your film to a bunch of theaters. And if you've done the audience building and we can really demonstrate, excitement, you can be released in the theaters where your film is most likely to perform well. So we're not talking about a wide 200 city release. That would be stupid, right? Not even giant movies make money that way. This is about rolling the film out in the markets where it's showing the most promise, and then on the basis of those, rolling it out in other markets. Okay. Now, how do you determine the fan base? I mean, is that something that is kind of measured through Seed&Spark, or is that? Yeah, so we set a very achievable minimum, which is 500 followers, and then you just have to raise money to cover the deliverables costs, right? So the deliverables cost all in $1,500, so you raise that money in advance. And Emerging Pictures wants filmmakers to raise $250 per market. So we set a $1,250 minimum marketing spend. And then filmmakers ask, well, what do we spend that on? And the answer is it depends on the market, right? So that's where Emerging Pictures expertise really comes in. But essentially you need to gather a mailing list of 500 or more, right? That's where it starts. The more you gather, the better your film will do across these platforms once you message them. The more markets you gather in, the better chance you have for a wider theatrical release. And we're hoping to add, 3 or 4 more of these kinds of deals this year. Now, Emerging Pictures, that's a completely different thing than something like Tug. Emerging Pictures is a theatrical distributor. They have a technology platform that installs servers in various independent theaters that makes their deliverable system quite seamless. I think Emerging Pictures is something you could have as a bonus, and you should always be thinking about your Tug campaign. Like, I think Tug is such an important, the educational outreach that we do, the crowdfunding to build independence workshops we teach in conjunction with Tug, because they also are really about showing you the material benefit of building your audience over time. Now, how do you have a relationship with Tug? That's right, isn't it? Yes. I mean, nothing formalized like if you do this, then you get that. It's that what benefits you on Seed&Spark is all the same stuff that benefits you on Tug. They do something we don't do, and we love them. We think they're really smart, nice people who really want to help filmmakers reach their audiences and have effectively over time. So we keep laughing like, oh, we've got to sit down and figure out sort of like what is our formalized, partnership look like, but nobody has time. We're like out there building these businesses. So in the meantime, we're just, sharing our educational efforts. Right. Okay. Now, when you go to these seminars, what sort of things are you teaching? I mean, what advice can you give to like somebody listening to this who wants to build up an audience and start creating a successful campaign? So first and foremost, we talk about learning how to identify your audience. I can't tell you how often it is that filmmakers will say, when I ask them, who's the audience for your film? And they'll say, well, this film's really for everybody. Or, this film has really universal themes. And
this is a snotty response, but it's one that is effective. And usually what I say is, the Bible has really universal themes, and that's had the longest, most expensive marketing campaign in the history of content. And not even everyone has read that or wants to, or feels like those themes are universal, right? So we have to start with, the answer can't be everybody. Okay, now what? Well, then the next one we get is the demographic, because actually that's a lot of what is taught, is like identify your demographic. So we'll hear someone say something like women between the ages of 24 and 35, or like wealthy men in their 60s. And somebody just after a workshop the other day sent me this hilarious graphic of Prince Charles and Gene Simmons, who match demographically in like 9 categories that get very specific, like wealthy, white, professional, skis in the Alps for vacation, family of 2 to 4 children, likes X, Y, and Z. Like, they match in so many categories, but I'm fairly certain that Prince Charles and Gene Simmons are not watching the same movies, right? Right. Or what we like to say is, take any 3 women and tell me, do they all like the same stuff? Do they all listen to the same music? And if they do, you should think about the homogeny of your social circle. So if you're a studio and you have a $250 marketing budget, you can use a spray and pray method of like marketing to all the women between the ages of 24 and 35. But bullets are expensive, right? And so, if you're an indie filmmaker and you don't have $250 million marketing budget, or you don't have $1 million marketing budget, or you don't have $100,000 marketing budget, or your marketing budget is your elbow grease, you have to get super strategic and tactical about where you are targeting your marketing and how. So we like to start with a very simple interview. And this is always funny, because, we're building a business as we're helping these filmmakers build their businesses. And every single time we have an aha moment, we realize that the aha is just to follow the advice we've been giving filmmakers all the time. Cause it's so intuitive. It's kind of silly. It's like so simple what works best. It's kind of silly. And that is, you simply ask people who you think would be interested in your movie. What do you think about this movie? And if they say, oh, that's interesting, then you're going to ask them a series of questions. Where do you hang out online? What social media platforms do you frequent? Where do you get your news? What kind of headlines do you click on? Who do you follow big time in terms of, bloggers or social media stars or other kinds of informational outlets? Or do you belong to alumni organizations, volunteer groups, church groups? What do you do in your free time? So are you usually online in your free time, or are you other places? What kind of music do you listen to? That one really helps, actually. And when you start to get overlap there, that can be really useful to you. And most importantly, we ask people, when you watch something, where do you watch it? Are you watching on your iPhone? Are you watching on your computer stream? And if you're watching on your computer, is it with a DVD drive, or are you streaming from Netflix? Do you stream things to your TV through what outlet, right? And what happens is you do 5 or 6 of these interviews and you start to see, interesting. 4 out of the 5 people I talk to are on Facebook, or 5 out of 5 people I talk to are on Facebook, but 4 out of those 5 people are also on Twitter and Instagram. And I don't have a Twitter or Instagram account. Maybe that's a place that I should start doing some outreach. 3 out of the 5 people said, when they are alone, they prefer to listen to jazz music. And I hadn't even considered jazz music as a potential way to, let's say, score a crowdfunding pitch video or infuse into my film. And then they might say, I mostly get my news from the Daily Show, and there's office dog typing up. office dog really likes The Daily Show. I mostly get my news from The Daily Show and the New York Times. Well, that person is saying something really interesting, right? What they respond to is either like authoritative kind of erudite headlines or satire. So that helps you. What you're starting to learn when you do these interviews is you start to build, how is it that my community of people who are interested in the kinds of films I'm making like to be talked to? Where are they being talked to? Where are they gathering, right? Online and in real life, right? Are these, right. Do I find that they all belong to a couple of the same volunteer organizations, for example, or they all subscribe to the same couple of newsletters? Like, these sorts of things become very, very important in the tactical nature of your outreach. And that's really the place to start, because they will start to give you creative inspiration as well. They will start to tell you things that will affect your movie, I think. When we crowdfunded for my first feature, Like the Water, which was the movie that sort of gave rise to Seed&Spark, we made this wish list like wedding registry, and we sent it out to everyone we knew. And because they could see all the individual items we thought it would take us to make the movie, they got inspired and they started offering us stuff that we hadn't considered. And as a result, we got offered locations that were head and shoulders above what we had been looking at. And we rewrote the script to incorporate them, and it actually made us a better movie.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're talking about interviewing people, where say somebody listening to this and that they want to start, they have a project and they want to start building their audience. Now, where do you suggest you're talking about interviewing people, but where do you find people in the first place?
Well, so that's a great place for social media, right? Is if you get out there onto social media and you're connected via social media, probably to some people who you don't know personally. Right? Mm-hmm. You could start with them to see if they're interested. You can also just start with your immediate community, your friends and family, and ask them about the movie first. Would you be interested in this kind of movie? And if they say no, that's not your audience. And if they say yes, great. Personal relationship aside, they're going to have information that's valuable for you. Right? Right. You also have to go out into the world. So not all crowdfunding happens with your friends and on the internet. You also have to crowdfund, in the world. Like, go to film festivals, go to independent screenings, go to your independent cinema and chat with some people afterwards. Go to talkbacks at your local universities about things that interest you or things that are surrounding your film. See who online is talking about the stuff you're making movies about. Reach out to them. These are all ways to build the community along the way, and also get really good data.
Okay. The thing I actually forgot to ask you to do, just so people understand, and I apologize in advance because I'm sure you've done this a billion times now, is just to explain what Seed&Spark is and what makes it different from, say, Indiegogo and Kickstarter and those. And then what I'd like to go through is kind of a typical campaign.
Sure. So Seed&Spark is a film-specific crowdfunding and distribution platform. And we are different in kind of a host of ways. The first is the crowdfunding tool itself. It's built like a wedding registry. We call it the wish list. So you list the individual items you need, and your community can contribute money towards those items, or they could loan them to you directly or gift them, right? So when we did it the first time, somebody covered the cost of all of our camera equipment. Somebody else loaned us the pop-up tents and all the sort of crafty like tables and stuff that we needed. A local coffee company donated 60 pounds of coffee, right? Because it isn't about fundraising, it's about filmmaking, right? It's about getting the film done. And everybody knows you live and die by what you can get for free. So this is a crowdfunding platform that just sort of understands that relationship between you and your audience and allows your community to get involved in ways beyond money. And we've found that creates much, much deeper buy-in over time. We have the highest success rate in the crowdfunding business. So I think over the last 12 months, we've seen a 77% success rate. That's double Kickstarter and more than Indiegogo's. We have the lowest fees. So we take a 5% fee like Kickstarter does, but we actually allow your supporters to cover that fee on your behalf when they check out, and about 60% of them do. So last year, our filmmakers paid 1.95% in site fees as opposed to 5%. We don't have a third-party payment provider, so you don't have those additional fees that would go to like Amazon or PayPal or something like that. So Kickstarter is an all-or-nothing crowdfunding method. Indiegogo can be all or nothing, or it allows for something called flexible funding, which is keep what you can. We've developed something that we think is much more specific to film. I don't think you should ever keep what you can in film crowdfunding, because you need to promise people what you're going to make, and then when the campaign is done, if it's successful, you need to be able to make that very thing. So if you're promising something that you say costs $20,000, you should not be able to keep $2,000 and go $2,000 of the way, right? That's not right. Success. Because either you're going to make a $2,000 version of the thing, which will suck, or you're only going to go $2,000 of the way, in which case those people who contributed the $2,000 towards the $20,000 goal have really been let down. So we developed something called the green light. And the green light is you get to keep your funds when you hit 80%. Why? Because we are ourselves independent filmmakers, and we know that indie filmmakers will make exactly what they promised at 80% of the budget, but it'll cost them a pound of flesh, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So we really want them to gun for 100%, but we also know that they will make what they promised when they hit 80. We're a selective crowdfunding platform, so you can't just load up your project and click go. We do a couple of rounds of feedback with you to make sure that your project is ready to go. We're content agnostic and we're not reading scripts, but we know what a good crowdfunding campaign looks like, right? So that's what we work with you on. We never tell anybody no. We always send rounds of feedback. And if you take that feedback, you move on. If you don't take that feedback, good luck to you in crowdfunding. And right. So we're also incentive-based crowdfunding. So you offer incentives for certain crowdfunding levels, but we also offer incentives in the form of sparks. And those are rewards points that both you and your audience earns when you fund, follow, share on Seed&Spark that you can spend to watch movies on our streaming VOD platform. So the act of crowdfunding with us contributes to the total environment and access of people being able to watch more films, which is, we think, super cool. And then we have these distribution deals that I laid out at the beginning, which nobody else has.
Okay, now what can you talk about some of the mistakes people make when they're crowdfunding and some of the other things that create we already kind of talked about, yes. Building an audience, but can you talk yes. about things that people do wrong?
Sure. Mistake number one is believing that the platform is going to do any work for you. Now, I say that as a platform that does a lot of work for our filmmakers. We do industry connections, we do festival connections, we do publicity, we do social media. But the fact is, if you build it, they will not just come on any platform, even if you land on the homepage of one of the major platforms. The work that you do building your audience and notifying your audience and exciting your audience is the work that makes a successful crowdfunding campaign, full stop. The second thing is people don't spend enough time building and nurturing that crowd before they start asking that crowd for money. And so it can be people often will initiate their social media in order to start a crowdfunding campaign. And that's not a good place to start. You want to start getting people terrified that they will miss out on this opportunity to participate in this killer new project with you. And then you give them a chance to contribute. So building momentum and creating inevitability of success are way more important than even your choice of platform, to be honest. The second place people go wrong very typically is they make a pitch video. It's like somebody went out and distributed a handbook that says the first thing that happens in a pitch video is you have to sit down and stare at a camera and talk. as if all the rules of filmmaking go out the door when you're making a pitch video, right? The good pitch video is still show, not tell. And it has a personal appeal. And it answers the questions, why me, why this, why now, and why you, the audience. But for the most part, the first 15 seconds of your pitch video have to be for the audience of your film. So you have to show us in those first 15 seconds that you are capable of making the thing that you're promising to make on a much larger scale should you get the resources you're trying to raise, right? And filmmakers will push back and they'll be like, but I don't have any money yet. And I say, when a breakout film from Sundance 2015, is shot on 2 iPhone 5Ss, you no longer have any excuse why you can't make a killer pitch video for free. Zero excuses.
Exactly.
So your pitch video has to be awesome, and it has to be independently awesome, and it can't rely on people falling in love with you in the first 15 seconds because you are not the movie. I mean, unless you're the movie, right? That occasionally that happens. But
yeah, unless you're the movie.
Yeah, if you're not the movie, then make us fall in love with the movie, and then we will fall in love with you. So that's the second really important piece of it. And the third piece is really understanding the work that it takes. Crowdfunding is its own pre-production and production phases. So you can't be deep into the throes of post and run a successful crowdfunding campaign usually, unless you have a bunch of people helping you. You can't be shooting and running a crowdfunding campaign. It's full-time work. So you need a team in place who can divide and conquer the work. And this is a new phase of the production cycle, that's different than it used to be.
Now, there seems to be more of a cultural element, like a community with Seed&Spark than like something like Indiegogo or whatever. Do you find that, I mean, even though you're saying that people need to already have their audience, do you find that people that go on Seed&Spark are more supported by other filmmakers and possibly get help after they launch their campaign? Yeah,
this is one of the most exciting things we've seen on Seed&Spark, and like I can sometimes get very emotional about this. Every filmmaker who comes to Seed&Spark and has crowdfunded with us tends to stick around and, sort of like lend a hand, whether it's through resources. So they're loaning a lot of resources to one another. I have that camera, or I have that C-stand, or I have that, pop-up tent that you need. They tend to loan a lot of publicity to one another, so they do a lot of tweeting of the campaigns that are really meaningful to them. They connect with each other online all the time. They help each other with scripts. They offer to get them involved in screening series. That piece of it, filmmakers helping other filmmakers, has been tremendous. But the thing that's even cooler is filmmakers are really funding other filmmakers on Seed&Spark. And that's certainly that's by no means, I'm not talking about to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars per campaign. But when I see campaigns come through and I see 20, 30 of our filmmakers contribute 10 or 20 bucks, that's a groundswell of support that happens right on early in the campaign. So that stuff has become increasingly meaningful.
Right. Now, from what I see, you guys are kind of sidestepping a lot of the traditional like filmmaking institutions that are out there. And I think it's a really positive thing in terms of like traditional distribution and traditional, things that kind of stand in the way of filmmakers being able to put their film out to people. Is that something that you're actively trying to kind of change, is like getting filmmaking back into the filmmakers' hands and allowing them to, be in charge of things and not having to go, I mean, you want to go to film festivals and things like that, yeah. But like going to, distribution companies and having to deal with kind of the gatekeepers. I
just want filmmakers to have the choice. And the power is in the choice, right? The power is not solely in, the ability to control it all, right? Because sometimes a filmmaker wants to make 2 or 3 films in a year. You absolutely are going to have to get a distributor involved, or you're going to have a really killer PMD, a producer, marketing, and distribution on your team. But the only thing these days that makes your IP, your intellectual property, that is your movie, valuable is your direct relationship to your audience, right? It's more valuable than, sorry, Alistair feels really strongly about this. Okay. That's more valuable than demonstrable, like putting talent in your movie. That's more valuable than, attaching a name director. What's really the most valuable, and I'm talking about in terms of dollars to your bottom line as a filmmaker, is your direct connection to your audience. So for me, it's really about giving filmmakers the greatest number of choices.
Right. Now, how long is a typical campaign?
30 to 45 days.
Okay. And during those campaigns, are there similar things like people are offering executive producer credits and things like that, or is it just typically getting sparks and donating things?
So people do offer credits. They also offer, and we really think, this is part of those interviews that you do. When you start to think about what incentives you're offering, you should also be asking them what kinds of stuff they would think is interesting. I think stuff that gets people involved more deeply in the story of your film is more interesting often than credits. At a certain level, yes, of course. And you deserve an EP credit if you invest a certain amount of money into the film. But, as a producer and somebody who, really understands producers who want to protect the sanctity of the producer credit, I think you have to be a little bit careful when you're assigning credits, and really understand what it is appeals to your audience. And that's not an objective thing. You should ask them. Right. What is it that would make you want to get involved at this level, at this level, at this level?
Okay. Now, changing to the topic of film festivals, can you talk for a little bit about the current, like what you're seeing at film festivals, if things are changing, if there's a different, over the past couple of years, if things have kind of moved in a particular direction, and how important film festivals are for the people that come to Seed and Spark and getting the word out and getting people, seeing the film?
So I think that for filmmakers who would like to have an independent, sustainable career, regional and local film festivals are almost a more important circuit than the majors. Now, I am not saying that if you get into Sundance, you should not go. Okay, I'm going to be really clear about that. But that only happens for, 0.1% of filmmakers a year, right? And right. I am perfectly comfortable saying I'm probably in the 99%. I have been all my life. I'll probably stay there. So in that case, what can I do to continue to build my career without the launching board of a major film festival? And the answer is these local film festivals in their regions or in their cities or in their towns gather to these events and have over time the community of film lovers in cities you would never otherwise go to. Like, I don't know how much occasion you have to go to Bay City, Michigan, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which you should go to. It's really cool. Memphis, Tennessee, Columbia, Missouri, Sarasota, Florida. The festivals that are happening in these cities are gathering the audience that you might not have another chance to get in front of, right? So these are the people who all of their friends go to for the film recommendations. So if you can get in front of them and you can get them on your mailing list and you can get them excited about the next thing you're making, you're building communities all across the country, right? In ways that are actually contributing to the sustainability of your career. And that's what I'm seeing as like the biggest opportunity of regional and local film festivals is they're doing a ton of audience building work for you. And so they're creating these phenomenal platforms for filmmakers to connect with their audiences, in a much more meaningful way. I mean, obviously reaching out to somebody on social media is fine, but shaking their hand, and getting to listen to them say, thank you, I really enjoyed that film, that's a much more powerful connection.
Now, for, one of the people that, not one of the people, but one of the critiques that I've heard from people about film festivals sometimes is that they'll pay a lot of money and they'll go to a film festival and play to like an empty theater. And that's kind of, I think, the nightmare that people have sometimes. Is there any way to kind of avoid that aspect of things?
Yeah, you have to get involved in building those audiences too, right? So one thing is if your film is playing to an empty house at a festival, that may have been a programming mistake. That may have been the festival, not really understanding that their audience isn't interested in that content as much, right? So one of the things you should be doing is researching festivals and seeing where you think the best fits are. Look at their other programming choices. What kind of films do you want to be next to? Where do you think the audiences are most rabid for your film? I mean, you can treat your festival as sort of a pre-theatrical release, in which case you should go to markets where people are particularly excited for that kind of stuff. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, of course, like, yes, that's a nightmare scenario, although I haven't had that experience. And I think it happens less often when the filmmaker is super engaged in building their audience, and they're at the right festival fit for them.
Right. Now, what festivals that are maybe a little bit more well known, like South by Southwest or something like that? What would you consider the festivals that you have a possibility of getting into that you should try to go to?
I mean, by the numbers, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question, because by the numbers, what is possibility? Is a 0.01% chance a big enough possibility for you?
Probably not.
Okay. So then consider if you think your film can legitimately compete at a Sundance or a South by, where there are a lot of celebrity-driven properties, there's a lot of money behind a lot of those projects, and when there's not a lot of money, there can be a lot of institutional support, right? They've gone through a major lab, right? Or they've gone through a major grants program that has a lot of those resources available to the filmmakers. If you don't have any of those resources, it may be very hard to get noticed by those festivals or at those festivals, right?
Right.
So some of it has to do with like scaling up to that. Maybe your first film isn't the one that needs to go to Sundance, but maybe your second one is. And your second one gets there because the first one you did such hard work building the audience and getting people loyal to you and demonstrating a desire for your work. Do you know what I mean? Like it's okay to give up this idea that the first one will go to Sundance and it'll get picked up by Sony Pictures Classic and then we never have to worry about the mechanics of it again. And if you're a woman or a person of color, you can get your first feature into Sundance and you can get picked up by a major distributor and you might not make another film for 10 years. So that mechanism works really well still for an elite few. The rest of us still just have to plan our dreams around a lot of hard work.
But you still feel like it's important to have a theatrical release first?
No,
right?
Not necessarily. I think if you demonstrate really good support, you can have a theatrical release. And certainly theatrical is still one of the best drivers of revenue in the VOD space, right? But that's because you have done some marketing and outreach around that theatrical release, and it's been in front of people's eyes a bunch of times. So theatrical is expensive in time and money. What we've done with emerging pictures is drastically reduce those costs and become much more tactical and targeted about it. But even still, there are films that can be successful just online if you really build that audience and you teach them how to evangelize for you along the way.
Now, is there a specific budget that your projects typically are? I mean, do they fall under the $1 million range, or are they like hundreds of thousands?
Yeah, they're definitely, I mean, so far they've all been under the $1 million range. But I think this can apply broadly. You know, you keep your budget down. It's a lot easier to recoup, and we can do a lot for a little these days. And that doesn't mean I think you should not have ambitions to make huge, cool sci-fi films. Those still need audiences. No, I'm serious.
Right.
Like I'm sitting on a sci-fi script that I can't wait to make, but the amount of audience building I would have to do in order to really make this movie is something that that's energy that I'm putting towards Seed&Spark right now.
Right. Well, and then everything is getting cheaper anyway. I mean, visual effects is getting cheaper, and I mean, you know, it's feasible to make a sci-fi movie for, you know, $500,000 now.
Totally. And, you know, the only thing I don't want to do is constantly scale down to zero so that people aren't getting paid. I think what's really interesting about the wish list that we've learned because of what people are listing is the vast majority of what people are crowdfunding for is to pay their cast and crew, which is great. But they're not listing for directors and producers fees. So the people who are taking on the bulk of the risk and the work are not setting aside money to pay for themselves. This makes Alistair particularly angry. So it's really, really important that artists continue to stand up and demand to be paid for their work, including from themselves. This is the hardest one, right?
Right.
That exposure is good. So directors and producers will say, yes, but, you know, I stand to gain the most from making this film in this way. And it's like, yeah, but you still have to eat or you still have to feed your family while you're doing all the work to get there. So that's
right. Stuff
that we really want to emphasize. Oh, he gets very riled up.
The topic of payment.
Yes.
Talking about that, do you feel like, I mean, do you know of any filmmakers out there that are at this kind of level of shooting independent films and going through the process of online distribution that have been able to dedicate their life to that? And I mean, that's their primary income and they've made it work?
One of my favorite examples is Paul Osborne, who made a movie, right? When I'm put on the spot. Oh my God. Paul, I apologize, for my mind going totally blank in this moment. Paul Osborne made a movie called Favor. I had the poster in my brain and I was trying to find the word on it.
Okay.
And he did this essentially perfectly. And he's gone out and really, helped a lot of filmmakers behind him learn what he did. There's a couple, Geeta Pulapili and her husband Aaron, and they made a film called Beneath the Harvest Sky, and their film before that, which, again, I'm going to not remember the name. This is really embarrassing. They really did this from the very, very beginning. They built an incredible relationship with their audience, and they were able to go out and monetize distribution on their first film in a way that sustained their lives. Mm-hmm. There are myriad examples of filmmakers like this who, God bless them, are all turning around and helping other filmmakers learn how to do what they did. Several years ago, Cora Olson and Jen Dubin from Present Pictures released a film theatrically, and they self-released a film starting theatrically and sort of went through all the windows, a film called Good Dick. And they were some of the first really to solidify a DIY approach to what we would consider sort of traditional distribution. And they too have been on the circuit speaking about it. So absolutely there are filmmakers who've done this. Some have done it out of necessity, but in the case of Geeta and Aaron, for example, they did it out of a desire to prove that there was another model that could work, and they did. And so that stuff is really exciting and encouraging. There's also filmmakers who are doing this sort of, they're building their own audiences and they're still going out and doing work for hire director jobs, along the way. So, it's also not a one size only for everyone model. It has different, it can scale differently depending on kind of how you want your career to go.
Right. Now, but what is when you talk about the model, what is is on the distribution end, what is that model?
So there isn't a single one that fits every film, right?
Okay.
With Beneath the Harvest Sky, because it was about blue potato farmers in Maine, they had this incredible partnership with JetBlue and, the blue chips and all that stuff. And so they did an airplane distribution deal that was appropriate for their movie. Paul Osborne, who was making sort of a black comedy, he had other things that fit his movie. It really there is no one size fits all, right?
Right.
And so what we're trying to do at Seed&Spark is put together as many distribution outlets for exploitation and let the filmmakers really build the models that work for them with this, new access.
Now, changing gears just a little bit, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to talk about your personality and just a little bit about your background. I know that, Seed&Spark is something that is, how old is it now? It's like
2 years and 2 months.
Okay. What, just for people who, I feel like people would be very inspired by, how you do things. Is there any tip that you can give people that will, what am I trying to say? What is your secret to having so much energy and having so much passion and waking up every day? I mean, what do you wake up like? What drives you instead of, because some people wake up and they're just like, complaining and don't really want to do stuff. I mean, what really drives you, and what is your kind of like driving goal in life or whatever?
Oh God.
Is that vague enough for you?
Yeah. What is my driving goal in life? Well, I can tell you that our shared vision at Seed&Spark is to give rise to the creative middle class, so that independent filmmakers can become the mom and pop shops of their, the sort of their content worlds, that artists everywhere can make a sustainable living if they want to, right? And that really it's about making sure that everybody is aware of what's available to them for this kind of career if they want it. That it doesn't only have to be you're waiting for someone to pick you. I guess what drives me a lot of the time is like, I don't like to be told no, because usually I'm like, but you don't get to tell me no. I can do it myself, right? So when I made, my first feature, which was all women, no sex, no relationships in the movie. It was about female friendships. It was about grief. It was, through traditional models, this was an unfundable movie. But we really believed that it was a story that would speak to a lot of people, people who had been through, grief, and also women who really felt like, female friendships had not been sort of fairly represented in film, which was why we started making the movie in the first place. And when people started turning us down, like, oh no, could you put a little lesbian erotica in this? We could really sell that. I'm not kidding. Somebody said that to me.
No, I believe that.
And we didn't want to give up control of creative control. We had an idea. We knew it must speak to some people if it spoke to like 6 of us enough to get the thing made. And so we came up with our own funding method, right? That got the community involved and proved to us that we were on the right path. And then when we premiered the film, we shot it in Maine and we premiered it at the Maine International Film Festival. And the mayor of the town we were in, Waterville, Maine, is also a woman who founded an organization called Hardy Girls, Healthy Women. She's a woman in her late 50s, really one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life. She was sort of surrounded by a group of people who had been in the Hardy Girls, Healthy Women. She raised her hand and she said, may I just say on behalf of women my age, I've been waiting for a movie like this my entire life.
Wow.
And so, like, that was proof to me that, like, the powers that be don't always know what they're talking about. And that gave me the sort of impetus to then move on to the next phase, which was, could we make what we did for ourselves available to as many others as possible? And what we have to build is a super flexible system because, again, it's a little bit different for each project, or it can be quite different for each project, right? So what we're doing is providing a set of very flexible tools and a whole lot of education, and then letting filmmakers' kind of creative minds take the next steps with it. For me, I was very lucky to have like really wonderful parents who gave a lot of sage advice as I was growing up. My favorite of which is probably my dad, who said, just do the next right thing right.
Yeah.
Which was very helpful for me when it gets overwhelming, which it does on an hourly basis. It can be very helpful to say, okay, if I just can do one thing at a time, which, sorry, multitaskers, humans can only do one thing at a time. What is the next right thing for me to do to go in the direction I want to go? The other piece is like, once I found filmmaking, and I came to it kind of late, you know, I meet these like 22-year-olds who are like, I've always known I wanted to be a filmmaker. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I had no idea what I wanted to do until I was 31.
Right.
But what's always been clear to me is like, I think people should be able to make a sustainable living doing what they love. I don't buy this notion that if you love what you do, you shouldn't have to get paid for it. Like, those two things are just not mutually exclusive. And so I think that's what drives us more than anything else as a team. You know, like, we've really come together around this.
Okay, I have two more my final segments. I always end them end every podcast with two questions.
Okay.
One is just for people to have a resource. Is there any book, film, or resource that has been extremely valuable to you?
Yeah, it's called The Lean Startup. I know that sounds like it should only be for startups, but I think every filmmaker should read it, because every independent filmmaker essentially is building an internet company, whether they like it or not, because they're finding their audience online and they're often doing a lot of distributing online. So The Lean Startup is incredibly valuable, and everywhere it talks about a tech company, just imagine they're talking about a filmmaking career. And probably one of my favorite podcasts out there is Chicks Who Script. It's three women, Emily Blake, Maggie Levin, and Lauren Shacker, interviewing people about, writing, the writing process, their filmmaking careers. And it's it's got its finger on the pulse of sort of like the real people charging ahead in diversity in film, which I think is really, really important in the future.
Okay. And the final question is called The Time Machine.
Oh, boy.
The idea is, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you were, let's say, 20.
Oh, God.
What advice would you have for yourself?
That's the hardest question I've ever been asked. I guess I would say be very kind to yourself. It's not an easy road. It's not an easy journey for anyone, no matter what choices they make. And to expend a lot of energy sort of wishing it were different or beating yourself up for, things you wish you could have done differently would be better spent, pushing ahead.
That's going to do it for today. I really can't thank enough Emily Best of Seed&Spark for coming on today. And don't forget, next week I'm going to be talking with Alex Dinelaris, the Oscar-winning screenwriter or co-screenwriter of Birdman. It was really bizarre. I was really excited to talk to Alex because only a couple of weeks earlier I saw him win the Academy Award. So, to be talking on the phone, it was pretty amazing. And on top of that, Alex is just one of the nicest guys in the world, very, very generous with his time. And I highly recommend, especially to screenwriters, listening to the next podcast episode, because we really go into screenwriting and nuts and bolts, what he does, his kind of, not really secrets, but just his way of writing. And I actually learned a whole lot from the podcast episode. So look forward to that next Tuesday. And that's going to do it for today.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Academy podcast. Don't forget to join our newsletter for more tips and tricks on how to make and market your film online. Go to www.indiefilmacademy.com.